What's up everybody, my name is Chris and today in this video I want to show you the walkthrough of the photo menu of the Canon EOS R5 C. Now I have a couple of camera angles set up here so that you can see different things as I navigate the menus, but I will be looking at the monitor that I have right here because one of the first things is that Canon still does not make it possible to have the viewfinder or the LCD activated at the same time as you are also using the HDMI monitor. This is kind of weird because in the video side of things, that is very customizable and you can choose what you want to show up where. So on the internal monitor, on the EVF, or on the external monitor. Now here I will be looking at the external monitor to navigate the menus and just show you how everything goes that way. Now, from what I hear, the R5 and R6 menus are pretty much the same as the R5C, but I have the R5C here, so that's what I'm showing you. First up, of course, we have the standard stuff that is left, right, and at the bottom of the screen when you are on basically on the camera menus and you just open this up. Now you can cycle through a couple of things with the info button right here so that you, for example, have the histogram and you can customize these in the menus as well. All of the button functions, that's something that I will not go over in this video as it is a menu walkthrough mainly. Now, what is interesting is that there are a couple of ways to basically make adjustments here. One of the ways is to use the button up here, the multi-function button, and there you have this kind of like setup where you can choose what kind of actions you might want to have accessible in a faster fashion with this specific button right next to the shutter. Then you also have the quick menu, and this is a little bit different from the cinema menu in this case, because in the cinema side of things, you just jump into the menu straight away. Here we have another quick settings menu with which you basically make adjustments to all the things that are usually left and right on the monitor or on the screen. So here you can adjust your focus, your server, your drive, and then you have which kind of card you want to use and what kind of files you want to write to which card. You have your shutter and you can adjust what kind of shots you want to do. Shutter mode essentially in terms of like how fast you want to go and or if you want to use the timer. You can make the metering settings where you want the camera to see in terms of light metering. Then the flicker adjustments, automatic white balance or the white balance settings, picture profiles, the highlight optimizer or light optimizer, and then whether you want to crop your image or not. So that's the quick menu that you have available right there. And then to go into the actual menu, you have the button at the top left, right next to the viewfinder. And when you press that, you come into this. Now, of course, we are starting with the image quality settings or the shoot menu. So here you have the image quality, whether you want to use dual pixel RAW. And one thing that is really helpful in the photo menu here is that you actually have these help pages right there built in with the info button in a lot of places. So in this case, for example, you can learn about what the dual pixel RAW actually does and how you might want to use that. So that's really helpful. And I wish they would do something similar on the video side of things where you have to really go into the menu to understand fully what the different menu options are providing you with. Then we have the crop setting. That's the same thing that you also have with the quick menu. And then we can already go over one step and there you have the exposure compensation. You can also make your adjustments whether you want, for example, a multi-shot exposure. This is useful when you are, for example, doing those HDR shots. Then you have your ISO speed range settings, whether you want to have the full range available or you might want to limit your range or go all the way to the highest possible ISO. Then we can also make the automatic range adjustments. So where do you want the automatic range to basically pull from? And I would usually just use the standard setting here. And then, of course, you have the min shutter. And there you can basically say, I would like that the minimum shutter is a certain speed, or you can adjust that this should always try to be a faster shutter speed to basically keep your frames in focus and, of course, sharp from any kind of like vibrations or stuff like that. You have your HDR, auto light optimizer, highlight tone priority, anti-flicker, external speed control. There's a lot of things right here. One step further, we have the white balance settings where you can adjust your custom white balance, your shift in terms of like color shift and stuff like that. The color space you might want to use and the picture profile, of course, where you might also use your user-defined settings. And you have a specific slider for the clarity of the frames. Now, I usually don't use many of the in-camera automatic adjustments like the clarity or stuff like that because I like to shoot raw and then do all of those adjustments later on in Lightroom. Now then we also have more adjustments in terms of like long exposure, noise reduction, stuff like that. Again, something that I tend to do in the aftermath and just do it in Lightroom because I want to have the biggest flexibility that I have available in this camera. Dust deletion data is also something that's quite interesting. You can adjust this with like a specific process so that the dust on the camera sensor is taken into consideration. Again, something you might also want to do in the aftermath, but you have the option to do it in camera here. Then we have all the multi-exposure settings in HDR as well as focus bracketing, which I find really interesting that they have this here as well. This is the first time I have a camera with focus bracketing built in, and I will maybe try this out at some point and play around with it to get one of those hyper sharp focus images. HDR is something that I really enjoy. However, again, something that I like to do in the aftermath. So I prefer to just get the raw photos out of that, but you might also be able to make those adjustments in there. And you also have the multi-exposure option so that you can choose your settings for that. And we have a built-in interval. Finally, I have a camera with a built-in intervalometer. This is something that I usually had to carry around with myself because the cameras that I used did not have that built in. Here you do have that, and you can basically make your adjustments how you want to do that. And something that I find quite maybe annoying is that you actually have to turn the camera off to stop the intervalometer if it's not ending by itself based on the number of shots, for example. As you can see here on the screen, turning the camera off will end the intervalometer, and that's something that you just have to deal with. Then we can also have other settings here with the touch shutter, the image review settings, so whether you want to hold the image or how you want to do those things. And then we also have metering settings in terms of like how long you want to keep the metering active, exposure simulation, whether you want to show that or not. And of course, you have the shoot info set up, and you can make your adjustments to the screen info settings. Like for example, here you can choose which one of these you would like to actually have as an option when you're cycling through with the info or the display button right there. And you can even make more in-depth adjustments. So you can literally change whether you want to have certain things on the screen here or not. So that's really, really helpful. Then we can go back again and go over, and we have the viewfinder, and there you can also make adjustments how you want to see this with the black border, or if you want to have it fill the whole frame. And then we have the display performance settings, and there you can choose whether you want to have the maximum performance of the monitor or you want to be a bit of a power saver and use more of your or less of your battery to display things on the screen. Then we are in the AF modes or AF settings, and there are so many different settings that I will probably not go into all of them, but you can see we have now vehicle detection here in this camera. We have animal detection and people, so that's really cool. You can use eye detection, you can use continuous autofocus or not. Now, for specifically in the photo mode, I don't necessarily think that continuous autofocus is all that useful, so I have it disabled most of the time and just use the touch autofocus or the kind of like the half press autofocus and use it that way. Then you also have touch and drag, and so you can also touch here on the screen when you are looking through the viewfinder and basically adjust your focus point that way. Position method relative, if it's mouse pad style or if it's absolute and you just touch on one place and it jumps to that point. And you can, of course, enable it or disable this. Then we also have manual focus peaking. This is a feature from the video side of things, but it's great to also bring it here to help in manual focus scenarios to basically adjust your focus a little better. Then we have the focus guide, which is super useful. And basically that is this little box that shows up, and you can basically see whether or not you are in focus when you have something that the camera actually also would try to focus on. And then you can see how you need to adjust your focus that way. And if you're shooting in a very dark environment, you can choose whether or not you want to have the focus assist beam. Then we have a lot of settings in terms of the servo AF. So you can see here, you have 4 different settings that you can choose from. You can also choose automatic. So the camera just tries to do whatever it needs to do to make the best possible image here. And you can also, again, see a info screen. And this is really, really cool. I think that it's incredibly helpful to make all of those adjustments and try to kind of like understand how all of that works. And you can actually make more adjustments to this specifically in terms of like the acceleration, deceleration, tracking sensitivity, and much more. So that's incredibly detailed. So something that you really have to play around with to get to know what kind of settings you want to make for your specific needs. Now we have more settings in terms of the focusing. You can see you can limit the AF methods, for example, whether you want to, for example, never use certain methods, and you can disable those, which makes the navigation and choosing of AF methods a little easier because you don't have to scroll through all of them and just have those available that you would want to have available. Then you can choose whether you want to lock the AF point in vertical and horizontal, or if it should adjust depending on where you actually put it on the screen. And you have a lot more to cover here. And one last page around the autofocus, initial servo AF point for faces, so how that sets up, and of course also the different focusing ring works, so whether you want to use it in reverse direction or the normal for Canon, because maybe you're coming to this camera from a different system and you would like to have it work the same way as you know it from whatever camera manufacturer you're coming from. And then you also can adjust whether you want to lock the speed of the dial that the adjustment does, or if you want to have a speed sensitive ring. So if you're turning it faster, it's actually also going to focus or rack focus much faster. And finally, we are over to the image playback, basically. So you can make different adjustments here, or rather use your images. So in this case, when you click on protect images, then you can actually go in and select the images that you want to protect, and then you can set those or erase images from a certain date and stuff like that. So those things are possible here. Then we have print order or photo book setup, not really something that I use ever. I use the camera to shoot, and then I transfer to my computer and do all of the other stuff there. Then we have raw processing, also something really interesting that you can already do a lot of stuff inside of the camera, but again, something that I rarely, if ever, use. You can resize, you can even convert, and I think that that is really useful if you are someone who is doing, for example, news shooting. You want to straight away publish something, or you want to transfer it to your phone and maybe send it off to, I don't know, when you're doing wedding photography and you want to give it to people. So those things might be helpful there, but I personally don't really use those features at all. Then we can also set up a slideshow with the HDMI port and all of those things. You can, do a lot of stuff there, but it's not something that I usually do. Now, what I do find really helpful is the rate and record button that is up here in the top left side. And there you can actually basically set up how this button should work in playback functionality. Whether you want to have it, for example, to rate something, or if you want to have it to play, or if you want to have it to lock the image and make it basically so that you can't be deleted. And you can also hold it to record a memo regarding that specific photo. So that can be incredibly helpful if you're, for example, using the memo functionality to be able to make notes about what kind of photos this is, who is on the photo, and those kind of things, to be really fast and not have to like type on the screen or something. Then we have the last point on the play menu. And then you can also set a couple of settings in terms of the HDR output, for example, if you want to show a grid or not, and all of those kind of things. Then we are with the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity setup. Now here you can set up your connections to different phones and other devices via Bluetooth as well as Wi-Fi. And of course also if you are using a GPS receiver or if you are using your phone for GPS coordinates. So those kind of things are possible here. And of course you can also transfer your images to, for example, your smartphone, which can be really helpful if you are on the go and you just want to really quickly share something on social media. So that's really nice that they have built this in again. This is something that I already know from the R, and I do have used these features to be able to just out of the field share something on social media that is taken with a proper camera so that I don't have to take the same shot multiple times on location with my phone and my camera. This just continues here with a second menu, which just have the reset communication settings. Too bad they couldn't fit that on the other page. Then we have different setup things. So this is basically like the functionality of the camera besides autofocus and shooting menus and stuff like that. So here you can basically choose where you would like to standard record on which card, how you want to do the numbering of the files, if it should reset when you format the card or stuff like that. The file naming can be done here, so you have your setup there so that those are indistinguishable or recognizable for you. Then you can format whatever card you have in there. And you can also set whether you want to automatically rotate your images on the camera, or if it should just auto-rotate on the computer, or if you want to just turn it off completely. Of course, you also have the date setup, but that's obvious. Then you have the next menu with language, video setup, so that what kind of a system are you using? I am in PAL, so Germany, Europe is in the PAL mode. You have different things that you can set up in terms of like whether you want to have the camera beep or not, headphone volume for the playback, those kind of things, and the eco mode or the power saving settings. Now, this is something that you might want to adjust for how long you want to have the display turn on or stay on when you are using the camera, how much power to draw or how convenient you want to have it. But the half press shutter, for example, is something that always reactivates things, so it might not be that much of a big deal to have a short time on this. Then on the next screen over, we have the screen and viewfinder settings, which one you want to have active. Now, I have this set up so that I basically have a button on the camera which makes this adjustment for me, so that I actually have a manual switch between the viewfinder and the monitor, so that I can choose between these two no matter how I'm holding the camera or if I'm covering the sensor for the eyepiece and stuff like that. So I prefer to do those things manual. Then you also have the screen brightness, UI magnification, all of those good things. Here you can make more adjustments regarding HDMI, touch control, like if you want to have it really be very sensitive, so you can make it sensitive or disable the touch control completely. Then you also have the multifunction lock, so which kind of buttons or things you would lock when you are pressing that lock button, so that no adjustments are made that way. You can choose whether you want to have the shutter open or closed when the camera is turned off, and if you want to have the automatic sensor cleaning enabled, power off enabled, or disabled. And of course, you can also clean now or clean manual. Now, the sensor cleaning setup actually is something that makes a difference whether you have it enabled or disabled, or of course, enabled on start and shutdown when you are quickly wanting to switch between photo and video mode. So that is something that might help to basically increase the speed with which you can switch between photo and video mode. Then we also can reset the camera, shoot modes to make the setups for the different custom shooting modes. This is something that I would wish they have in the video side of things. And you can also save and load the settings from the card and to the card. So that's also really useful when you are using multiple of these cameras. Now, I have heard, however, I could not confirm this, that this is not possible to transfer these settings between, for example, the R5 and the R5 C. Despite those cameras being fairly close to each other, these settings are not something that you can transfer. Then we have lastly a bit of battery information as well as certificates and firmware. This would be something where you would check your firmware, or rather where you would upgrade your firmware if there is a needed firmware upgrade for an accessory. And last, we have the custom function stuff, or the more custom function stuff, where you can more, for example, adjust how fast you want to adjust your exposure levels and much, much more. And I think I will just go through these so that you have an overview as to what is possible here. Of course, you can make so many adjustments here. It is really mind-blowing, honestly, to be able to make all of these different adjustments to make your camera work however you want your camera to work. However, I also noticed that it is sometimes really tricky when you are making a lot of adjustments here, because of course, if you, for example, have to reset your camera for whatever reason, it might be a bit of a complex process to get everything set up again in the way that you would like it to be set up. So I try to not make too many adjustments and keep it to the bare minimum. However, I do make adjustments nonetheless. So I do, for example, customize these styles often, especially with the control ring that is on the lenses. I choose something there that makes sense for me. I also sometimes adjust a lot of the buttons to be able to have those functionalities set up however I want them to work, and to make my workflow really, really easy. But I am aware that sometimes this is something that makes my life a little harder, especially when I, as I said, have to reset the camera or do something similar. Then you also have the IPTC information stuff. You can choose whether you want to have the selection for deleting stuff on the cancel, or directly go to the erase, or just the erase raw, or just the erase non-raw. There's so many options here that you can do that are really interesting and probably helpful for some people. Now, something that I like to set is that I want to have the release shutter without lens to off. And there's also another setting somewhere in here where you can say whether you want to have the camera release the shutter when there's no card in there. But I also usually have that turned off because I want the camera to let me know when there's no card in there, essentially. And you can, of course, also clear all of these custom functions to basically reset everything to the standard without needing to reset literally everything on the camera. Now here, last but not least, we have the My menu. And this, of course, is the menu that you can make so that you can adjust and basically have everything that you want right there on the touch of a button, which is really, really cool and incredibly helpful, because that way you can build your own menu with the things that you use the most, but you don't have enough room, for example, to put it on a button around the camera. So that's something that I find incredibly valuable and incredibly helpful. And here you can even, I think you can rename the tab, so you actually have a menu to basically rename this however you desire. And then you can make all of that happen. Now this concludes my walkthrough of the Canon EOS R5 C photo menus. If you have any questions around this, please feel free to leave those in the comment section down below. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. That's always appreciated. I hope this helped you with getting to know the Canon R5 C. Maybe it helps you decide whether you want to get this camera or not. And with all that said, I hope you have an amazing day, make it your life, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.